Alright guys, this video is for all you ball python owners out there, and it's one of the hottest topics on the internet, probably most talked about, and that is how do I feed my ball python and why won't my ball python eat anymore? So let me kind of go through the list and kind of lay it all out, and I have a whole room full of snakes here, and I feed about 500 rodents every month. So I've seen a lot and I've learned a lot, and sometimes it's extremely frustrating, and sometimes if you know the right trick it can be very rewarding. So let me share a few of my thoughts and my ideas. Okay, so I have kind of a recent development. I'd say my most recent advancement as far as feeding ball pythons that has given me the most success overall is this little contraption right here, and it is a heat lamp. It's like a it's like a little chicken heat lamp with an infrared bulb on a little stool. And what I do is I put my rodents right here on a paper towel and warm them up for about 10 minutes. So when I do frozen thawed, the way I do it is I'll take my frozen rodents and I'll lay them all out on the table. And this room's probably 81, 82 degrees, and I'll let them thaw for usually a couple hours. And then right before I feed them, what I'll do is I'll put them under the heat lamp and I'll time it usually between 10 and 15 minutes. And I find the hotter they are, the more that the ball pythons will take them. And what I like to do is I like to feel them right before I feed them. And if they're really, really hot, I try not to get them too hot to where it feels like they're going to burn the ball python, but the hotter the better up until that point. And they go crazy over those hot rodents, let me tell you. And even when I euthanize my rodents, I was doing fresh kill for a long time, just, euthanize them for 3 minutes and feed them to the ball pythons. Well, I found that if I euthanize them with CO2, put them under that heat lamp for about 10 minutes, get them really toasty warm, and they'll really go crazy over them. So that is by far, I'd say, one of the best tricks that I've found lately for helping me feed my ball pythons. Okay, so let's talk about kind of an old wives' tale about how to feed your ball pythons. And I've seen this on the internet, and I've gone into pet stores, and a lot of people still do this. And I would say you probably shouldn't feed your ball pythons that way. And that is what a lot of people will recommend. I don't think it's right, is taking your snake out of the enclosure, putting it in another container to feed it, and then putting it back. So what the problem is right now this ball python is in feeding mode. And if you dangle the rat in front of him, more than likely this ball python would eat a rat. But ball pythons change modes really fast. So if I was to pick up this ball python, it would either go into a handling mode, or like kind of what it's going into right now is like a flight mode, being scared. And if you took that ball python, moved it into another container, now you have a snake that's either in handling mode or in flight mode, and it's really hard to get them back to feeding mode. And even if you did get them back to feeding mode, and you actually could get them to eat, the problem is now you have a snake that's eaten. It has a fresh rodent in its belly, and I've seen, even if you move a snake just a small little ways with a fresh rodent in its belly, it can regurgitate that rodent. So even during the breeding season, when I basically separate all my snakes for feeding and I feed them, I always wait at least 2 or 3 days. I started actually at the end waiting 3 or 4 days, because if you feed them and then move them to another tub, as soon as they eat, they can regurgitate. And I've had several that regurgitated several times, the same snake, and it's really concerning moving a snake after it's fed. So I would recommend whatever enclosure you're using to feed it right in the enclosure and not handle that snake for 2 or 3 days after it's eaten. So I also heard on some of the forums on the internet, and people are emphatic over this, and they say ball python hatchlings will never eat a pinky mouse because a pinky mouse is too small. Well, I actually found this year that I have a couple ball python hatchlings that have actually eaten pinky mice, and it's kind of I guess it's kind of an outlier. So take a look at this. I have this girl over here. I tried to assist feed her. She didn't eat. She's probably the last smallest little hatchling, and this this poor thing. It's been out of the egg for, I'd say, a couple weeks, hasn't eaten anything. And I had another one exactly like this that's actually started eating pinky mice before they actually got fur on them. Not newborn pinky mice, but pinky mice that almost started getting fur. And this thing is so incredibly small. It really needs something smaller than, normally you can feed them like mouse hoppers for a first meal, and something that small definitely needs, I'm not even sure where this other one was that was eating the pinky mice, but there's a lot of them that have already eaten like 5 already, so it's kind of out there that ball python hatchlings never eat pinky mice. Well, I've kind of proved it wrong in this particular case with just basically like 2 snakes out of 100 that were too small, and I think there was kind of something wrong with that clutch where some of them were really underdeveloped and really small. I'd say in most cases, ball python hatchlings, you can start them on hopper mice. But in a rare case, like I have a couple snakes here, you can actually start them on pinky mice. So when you're feeding ball pythons, there's really only one thing on the menu, and that is rodents. And there's actually a few different kind of rodents, and most people say you really want to get them over to rats, just regular Norway rats, as soon as possible. So basically when you first start feeding ball pythons, I found the first meals that are ideal for ball pythons are really live mouse crawlers, and they go crazy over live mouse crawlers, and most of the times they won't eat rat pups, the little pinky rats. I've tried rat pups, through my whole rack, moving them down over and over and over, and I hardly got any of them to eat, and then immediately switched to live mouse crawlers, and almost every single one ate. And usually for the first, I would say 3 meals, you could do a live mouse crawler, and then after that, normally you can jump into like a frozen thawed mouse hopper. And then once they eat 6 rodents, I found they'll eat anything. So in a lot of these, I have 6 rodents on here, and once they eat 6, they will eat anything. This is my calico bamboo female, very beautiful snake. And a lot of these are going to be at the show this weekend. I have a show coming up in 2 days. I'm going to be at the Denver Repticon, selling a lot of these snakes, some coral glows and bamboos and a scaleless head, and I have some albino 100% het pied. I'll have a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be really awesome. So definitely I hope to see you there. So speaking of rodents and different kinds of rodents, I have a couple snakes that are mousers. They will only eat mice. They will not eat rats at all. And one of them down here is my jungle woman spider. She actually laid some eggs last year. She got egg bound on some of them, and half of her clutch went bad. But I did still get some really cool babies out of her. She's back on food. She will only eat big jumbo frozen thawed mice that I buy online at Rodent Pro. And the problem with the mouser is it takes a lot of mice to put on weight, especially if you're trying to breed them. I don't think this girl's going to be ready for the breeding season this year, so I think she's going to take the year off. And I actually tricked her this week. So I had all my frozen rodents all laid out, and I had my jumbo frozen thawed mice that were thawing. And so I had a bunch of rats that I euthanized with CO2. And what I did is I took one of my rats that was probably 2 to 3 times as big as a jumbo mouse, and I kind of wiped it a little bit, just back and forth on those on those frozen thawed. Basically, they were the thawed mice, and I got the mouse scent on that rat, and that snake actually ate it. I couldn't believe it. That's the first time that snake has ever eaten a rat. So that's kind of a trick that I just kind of stumbled on this time. And if I can feed rats, I definitely have a lot more rats, and I can feed fewer rats to this girl instead of feeding 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 mice in a sitting. I could just feed one rat and be done with it. So it's definitely a lot easier for me, and I would go through a lot fewer rodents. So let's talk about why your snake won't eat. And there's a few reasons that your snake won't eat, and sometimes it's just totally unexplained. You just can't explain it. They'll eat and eat week after week after week, and then they'll just stop. And one of the reasons is the so-called 1,000 gram wall, I guess you would call it. So basically, when you're raising up hatchlings, they will eat like crazy, just week after week after week, until they reach usually from 700 grams to 1,000 grams. And it seems like, it almost seems like their body is taking a break, waiting for their head to catch up. Because it seems like a lot of these snakes, they get really big bodies and the head's really tiny. And it's almost like a period of where their body takes a break, and the rest of their internal organs and their head and everything else kind of catches up. That's just kind of my theory, but I see it in a lot of snakes where right around 1,000 grams, they'll, for whatever reason, as soon as they hit that benchmark, they just kind of slow down, and sometimes they'll just stop for weeks or even months at a time, which is kind of interesting. So another reason your snake could go off of feed, and that is during a shed. And I have some snakes here. Usually, with as many snakes as I have, there's always a lot that are in shed, and you can tell they're in shed when their eyes get kind of hazy and blue like that, and a lot of times they'll get like a dull color until they shed out. And I would say with ball pythons, I'd say about 50% of the time when they're in shed, they won't eat. So if you see them in shed, I would definitely still offer food, because I've seen a lot of my snakes in shed, and they will definitely eat. But I'd say 50% of the time, if you got a snake that's regularly eating, I would say there's a good chance that it won't eat when it's in shed. And especially my reticulated pythons, it seems like every time they fast, they're going to the shed. And I actually have this, my male purple albino super dwarf. He's part super dwarf, part dwarf, purple albino, and he's been in shed, I'd say maybe about a week now, and he will not eat. And you can tell he's really defensive, really aggressive, and if I try to put a rat by him, he just he'll actually snap at it in kind of a defensive mode, and his eyes turn really cloudy, and now they've cleared, so the shed is pretty close. And what I do right before the shed is I try to really spray them down and make sure they have enough humidity so they have a good shed. And I like to put them on the coconut husk too for the shed if possible. So shedding ball pythons, I'd say most of the times they won't eat. For the hatchlings, I've seen a lot of them will eat when they're going into shed. But that's one of the big reasons I would say that ball pythons don't eat. So another reason that your ball pythons can fast, I would say it's because they are just big and obese. And I have this big, obese head caramel female down here, and she's just massive. And she was pounding these really, almost the biggest rats that I could give any ball python. And she was just pounding them left and right and left and right. And she got to the point where she's just so big and massive that she just stopped eating. and I think she's just so big, she could probably stop eating for, like, she hasn't eaten for a couple months, and you couldn't even tell it. And she could probably stop eating for another month or two, and you wouldn't even hardly know it. Their metabolism is so slow that once they get that big, they really don't need to eat. And once they stop eating, they stop going to the bathroom. So it's almost like having a pet rock at that point. So another reason your ball python probably won't eat, and I would say probably the number one reason, is because it does not feel secure in its environment. And when I actually started in ball pythons, I had glass aquariums and little hides, and I don't think those snakes were very comfortable in those environments. As soon as I brought them over to these racks, especially with these gray tubs, it's just kind of amazing how all my ball pythons really kind of were just, their appetite really kind of popped when I brought them over to these. And check out this beauty. This is my albino pied holdback from this year. Probably one of my favorite hatchlings of the year. And basically what it does is it takes that little tiny hide that they were living in and it expands it to the whole size of this. So now instead of just living in a little tiny tub, it expands it to the whole tub instead of just a tiny little enclosure. And I really think that ball pythons really like a dark, enclosed environment. And I've seen them in like clear racks, and a lot of people have racks with the clear tubs, but they still, even with the clear tubs, they still have a hide in there. And what you're doing is you're taking the whole tub, and basically, if it's clear, it's not really acting as their comfortable spot to live in, and then you need a hide, and basically the hide is acting as their comfort zone. And I really think the gray tubs kind of expand that to the whole tub becomes their comfort zone. And when I moved from the glass aquariums over to these tubs, it was like night and day, and all my snakes started eating like crazy. So I really attribute a lot of my success to having these dark enclosures with the gray tubs. So for a while I was having problems with my ball pythons eating, and I kind of found a trick that really got a lot of them to eat, and that was switching from frozen thawed or fresh killed to live rodents. And let me tell you, ball pythons go crazy over live rodents. The problem is you really need to pay attention to the size difference between the snake and the rodent. You want to make sure that the snake can easily overpower that rodent, and even still, there's a chance that rodent can bite your snake. and for a while I was having a lot of success feeding live rodents to all my snakes. And then I noticed on a couple of my albinos that they had bite marks on their head now and then, and then it kind of freaked me out that if you have a bite mark on a snake, it could easily take out an eye, and sometimes I don't know if it's the most humane way to feed, especially for the rodent and the snake, really. So for a while I was a really strong proponent of feeding live just because it worked so well. And now the only time I'll feed live is if it's a mouse crawler for my hatchlings, and the only reason is because that's basically all they will take as a hatchling is a live mouse crawler for the first few meals. As soon as I can, I'll get over to frozen thawed, and even now with my rat pups, my smaller rats, I'll still euthanize those before I feed them. And I'm trying to get more away from the live feeding, even though it works really well to feed live. It's kind of a struggle because I think it's the natural hunting instinct of the snake, and a lot of times it'll snap them out of a fast if you can pop a mouse in there. And what I found is if you really want to let it feed live and you want to do it the right way, I would say time it, put the rodent in there, close it up, and check back within 5 minutes. Don't let it go more than 5 minutes, because that's when things can go really wrong. And as a matter of fact, you could check earlier than that too. And some people will kind of watch the whole thing and make sure that the snake is okay and everything's going okay with that. But personally, if you're going through a fast, it's another option is you can feed live to snap them out of the fast. All right, so let's talk about assist feeding ball pythons. So assist feeding is basically when you take a rodent and you put it in the mouth of the snake, either a frozen thawed or a fresh killed rodent, and basically what you do is you just push it in until it's in the back of the throat, kind of push down to sink the teeth into the rodent, and then you just basically set it down, and and hopefully that snake will eat it. And I've kind of read on some of the forums that people with adult snakes are considering assist feeding, and you definitely never want to assist feed a snake unless it is a hatchling ball python that has never eaten before. So normally on some of the hatchlings, what happens is they kind of confuse. They get kind of confused between the aggression and the feeding response. And I've seen a lot of my ball pythons where you put a live mouse crawler in there for the first meal, and it'll just keep snapping and snapping in defense instead of grabbing and wrapping to eat. And in that case, you can actually lose your snake because it hasn't learned to eat yet. But usually after a couple assist feedings, it'll catch on, and then you'll never have to worry about it again. But for an adult ball python, they'll go on a long fast, and you should definitely never assist feed an adult ball python. So let's talk about a fasting ball python, a ball python that refuses to eat. So there's a few things you can try. You can switch the enclosure, put it in a tub. You can switch the substrate, kind of go with like a coconut husk substrate. And it seems like they feed better if it's a coconut husk, if it's totally enclosed. You can switch to different kinds of rodents. You can go from mice to African soft furs to rats. You can do different sizes. You could do live versus frozen thawed. There's a whole bunch of different things you can try. And if it still won't eat, that's just a ball python. Sometimes they won't eat. And I would say typically the larger the ball python, the less you have to worry about it. If you have a hatchling, I'd say a couple 100 grams, maybe even smaller. I would definitely work to get that ball python to eat. I would probably switch to some kind of a live mouse crawler or a live mouse. I've actually tried hoppers, and it seems like they're almost too fast for the ball python. But if it's an older snake, I'd say 500, 1,000, 1,500 grams. If you have a 2,000 gram snake and it goes on a fast for a couple months, I would say don't worry about it at all. Usually once they hit 1,000 grams and they go on a fast, I would say you're perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. Just continue to offer food once a week. And just be patient. It's kind of like a pet rock. So so that's basically it for my feeding. I hope this helped you. We'll give you some suggestions and ideas and kind of some of the stuff that I've been through. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.